to solve a problem that is obvious, that's a very good idea. And as I said, if it's done wisely, then it's going to work. And wisely means, of course, all the things that the person from the law firm indicated: transparency, reliability, and things being enforced. Right? And so I think it was a super interesting conference. I was very happy in the end. I thought, well, I've learned really a lot. And I was also very happy that Dr. Ha made it possible for you to attend, because I think you'll be the persons to supply the arguments to these discussions, right? I mean, you'll be the ones to whom someone will turn and say, what do you think? And sometimes what you say confirms what people write in the business press, and sometimes it doesn't. And you should be confident to say, no, I think this argument doesn't make sense. And one of the arguments I brought up on Tuesday and Tuesday and Wednesday is that a current account deficit is something that you should avoid by any means. I mean, a current account, if that's what Michael Binder said, I mean, if you open up Vietnam for even more capital inflows, you will, by definition, run current account deficits. But that's a healthy thing, right? Because this reflects all the investment being financed by accessing international financial markets, right? So the idea that current account surpluses are good and current account deficits are bad is just, we have an American government following this idea, but that just shows the incompetence of these people, to be honest. Okay, good. Okay, so that was my sermon at the beginning, and now let me go into my presentation. I think we've really come a long way. And okay, so now, so far what we've looked at is a so-called endowment economy. An endowment economy is an economy that has an exogenous output time path. Output is exogenous, cannot be influenced. And suppose that output goes up and down, and suppose that beta 1 plus r, beta being the subjective discount factor, 1 plus r being the gross interest rate, equals 1. So you're compensated for your impatience by getting an interest. Exactly so. Now, I'll refer to our slides, Min, but if beta 1 plus r equals 1, then the optimal consumption path is flat. So you implement consumption that doesn't change over time, and now being confronted with this volatile output path, you run a current account deficits when times are bad to stabilize consumption. So you sell assets, you borrow abroad, and you're running a current account surplus in good times. So in good times, you reduce liabilities and you purchase assets and you lend. So you're using the international financial market like, a person would use a bank. I mean, you go to the bank and deposit money when you have plenty of money, and you withdraw money when you have little money. Now there's one catch, and at the problem set I tried to make this clear, which is, and I think it was Lin bringing it up, borrowing constraints. So it could be that when times are bad, financial markets are not willing to supply the funds. Now that of course indicates that our model might have to be made more complicated, that you have borrowing constraints. Here we have perfect capital mobility, so there are no borrowing constraints. So as long as you comply with your intertemporal budget constraint, you can borrow and lend, and financial markets will be willing to supply those funds. Good. Now, this is all the stuff we did, right? And then we did that example. And again, this was an example of an endowment economy having a temporary negative income shock. So that's the blue line. So you see output drop in one period, and then and that's the perfect foresight assumption, that it's going to return to its long-run level after some time. Now, you see that consumption drops an impact. That's the dotted bright blue line. Consumption drops an impact because the present value of lifetime income has decreased. However, you're not reducing consumption by as much as output, and that's reflected in the current account balance. The current account balance goes down because you have negative savings. And where do these negative savings come from? Well, these are the loans that you're taking up in international financial markets. Now, the current account balance stays negative for a while and then returns to zero. The net international investment position goes down and then eventually converges to a long-run constant level, which means that you're sitting in the long run on a negative NIIP, more liabilities than assets, and this in turn explains why the difference between output and consumption is negative, because the difference, this is exactly the primary income that you have to make, the interest payments that you have to make on these liabilities. It's like someone having borrowed and not reducing his liabilities, but just making the interest payments, which is not a Ponzi game. A Ponzi game would mean you're never actually paying the interest. So that's the equilibrium, and that indicates what the role of international financial markets. Because if we didn't have international financial markets, then consumption would completely follow this output path, right? So consumption would drop by 50% and then would slowly recover, which would be very painful for the economy, because I mean, reducing consumption by 50%, that can be, this means a lot. And so this is what justifies or is also the idea behind removing investment barriers and integrating an economy into international financial markets. So the NIIP stays negative forever. Does this volatile the no Ponzi game condition? The answer is no, because no Ponzi game condition would mean would be violated if you didn't make the interest payments, but here the country does. What would have happened if the output drop of period 2 had been anticipated in period 1? In fact, that's also what we did on Wednesday. If you anticipate a decline in output, but the decline hasn't taken place yet, you reduce consumption already now. And this in turn implies that the current account goes up and then it goes down, right? We would have this non-monotonic evolution of the current account balance. In this example, the current account is pro-cyclical, so it's positively correlated with GDP. Do we observe this in the data? And the sad fact is, no, we don't. And we'll see that later on in one of the next presentations. Does this mean that this model is bad? Yes, no, no, right? Yes and no, but more no than yes. I think that the model is good because it shows us the basic mechanics and trade-offs, but it's not perfect because there's one thing that it cannot explain, namely the negative correlation between the current account and GDP, which we observe in the data. So how do we react to that? Well, we react to that by saying, okay, we have to go one step further, and we have to bring in something that we don't have in the model so far. And that's the appropriate way of thinking about things. Where might this model differ from reality? If we do not consider a small country, well, let me be explicit on that. If we don't have a small country, if we're not talking about a small open economy, but a large open economy, then there would be an effect on the interest rate, and the whole thing would be much more complicated. So if the United States borrows like mad on international financial markets, this has an impact on the interest rate. If Belgium borrows like mad on international financial markets, this doesn't rock the international financing conditions will not be changed. So if this temporary income shock happens to the United States, and they go to international financial markets, then the interest rate might actually be affected. And this would, of course, force us to endogenize the interest rate, which we haven't done so far. So the model would be more complicated because if we didn't have a small open economy, if agents are aware of uncertainty, this would have an effect on savings behavior. Now suppose let me give you an example. How much do you save if I tell you that for the rest of your life, you earn, say, 5,000 euro a month? Every day, every month, right? There's no, how much would you save? You would probably save nothing because, you have a constant income stream. You save because in some periods you have a lot of money and you think you want to. Now suppose compare this to the situation where you have an income of 1,000 euros in bad times and an income of 9,000 euros in good times. So you have uncertainty. How much would you save in good times? Maybe half, right? And why is that?
Because you want to slow down your consumption.
Exactly. You wanna. In fact, we're talking about uncertainty, right? And you want to save for the rainy day, as some people say, and that's called precautionary saving. So we observe that people confronted with more uncertainty save more. Now here we don't have uncertainty because we have